Okay, the recording is now live.
Okay, so shall we begin?
Please do.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Barry, and I work with the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna, which is the biodiversity working group within the Arctic Council. And I'm going to be moderating our session today. And our session is focused on informing Arctic marine decision making, which of course is a very topical issue at the moment, both within the Council and also in other areas as well. For example, through the negotiation of a new agreement on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. So there's a lot of political focus and interest on everything that happens in Arctic marine areas. Our panel today started out as having 5 people, but due to the coronavirus and my computer, which is now just, the screen has gone dead, Alan. So can you hear me?
That we can hear you and see you. Don't worry.
Well, I can hear you, but I cannot see questions. But I will try and join it by my phone as well. So we're going to have 3 people joining us today. Paula, who's the chair of the Protection of Arctic Marine Environment Working Group within the Arctic Council. Jonathan, who's going to speak to us about the outcomes of the Model Arctic Council, which has just, I think, completed its deliberations. And Jiayu, who's going to speak from China on perspectives to what's happening in the Arctic from outside. As we have so fewer people on the call today, then I would ask our panelists that they can take a minute or 2 longer in their introductions. And I would ask each panelist to say a few words on their interests, their thoughts to get us started. And we could maybe start with Paula, go to Jonathan, and then to Jiayu. And in the meantime, I'll try and get my computer to work so I can read questions. So Paula, please.
Okay, thank you. So, dear and respected Arctic colleagues, my name is Paula Kankaanpää, and I'm Director of Marine Research Center of Finnish Environment Institute. And I'm also Chair of PAME and Vice President in IASC. The topic of this panel is informing Arctic marine decision making. So I have chosen my message in this panel to raise up the ecosystem-based management, but then also marine spatial planning in the Arctic as important tools for cooperative knowledge-based decision-making or kind of knowledge to action, and then back to knowledge loop. Ecosystem-based management is a systematic structure and fixed timeline for regular interaction cycle between resource managers, conservation agencies, resource extraction, traffic, local and indigenous people, and then of course researchers and experts in different fields of sciences. Ecosystem-based management involves actors from all levels, from local, national, regional, and global levels. The Arctic Council has great potential to truly implement marine ecosystem-based management, especially because the Arctic Council work is horizontal or cross-sectoral by nature. The Arctic Council has already adapted the Arctic Marine Strategic Plan 2025, and there the ecosystem-based management is among its main topics. And now the senior Arctic officials have decided to devote regularly 1 full day meeting on marine topics and implementation of this Arctic Marine Strategic Plan. At the same time, scientists are preparing the first integrated ecosystem assessment of Central Arctic Ocean. And this type of assessment is always the first step and the basis for ecosystem-based management process. In very short, ecosystem-based management is a systematic cooperative process and self-correcting loop to first assess, then manage, and then monitor. And then again, assess, manage, and monitor of entire functioning of ecosystem, instead of managing a single species population, for example, and it includes human behavior. Ecosystem-based management have successfully been implemented in some regional sea areas. And my example here where I'm mainly working nowadays is the Baltic Sea area that operates under the Baltic Sea Convention and HELCOM. And there or here, the ecosystem-based management cooperation has already achieved many measurable good results. So this is what I wanted to emphasize in this panel now. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. And we'll move on to Jonathan next. And once we finish our three panelists, then we'll open up the floor for questions. And then I would ask people to prepare to type in their questions on the question and answer chat option. Thanks, Jonathan.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Jonathan Wood. I'm an LLM candidate here at the University of Akureyri. I previously received my JD from the Georgetown University Law Center, but I'll be here not speaking in my capacity as an attorney looking to specialize in polar law, but as my positions on the Model Arctic Council, which just concluded their work, finishing up the final SAO report about an hour ago. So we have a final solid document with 19 concrete proposals that all reach consensus. And during these last 4 days, I serve not only as PAME chair, and I encourage my panelists to look at those recordings to see my performance, to see how terribly I did in representing the work that she actually does. But I also represented Canada as a senior Arctic official. So I just really I'm willing to speak regarding how we came to find consensus, the various ways that we did via online diplomacy, as well as some of the challenges we faced in doing so. So any questions you have regarding this type of new online diplomacy, I'm more than happy to speak to. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. And Jiayu, if you'd like to say your introduction, thanks.
Yeah, hello, respected Arctic colleagues. Very happy to join in this panel. I'm Jiayu, a professor from law school at Ocean University of China. And I used to be the visiting professor of Dalhousie University Law School in 2019 and visiting scholar of the George Washington University in 2009. And my research interests mainly include the Arctic shipping laws, Arctic governance and policy, law of the sea, and maritime law. My publications include several books such as the legal research about Arctic shipping research, the legal regulations about ballast water, and the research on the marine invasive species, legal prevention and control, and also more than 60 articles relevant with the Arctic legal issues and law of the sea study have been published. Well, as to the topic today, I would like to share my general opinion first, that the Arctic actually has been experiencing transformative change for more than 20 years. And this transformation triggered by the climate change has generated a need for the Arctic cooperation. And the acceleration of the sea ice melting in the Arctic results in a rise in the sea level and extreme summer weather in the northern mid-latitudes. Meanwhile, the accessibility of the Arctic provides an opportunity for the navigation, resource exploitation, tourism, and other human activities in this region. So an active, effective Arctic governance system could steer the social ecological system towards the pathways that are collectively desirable and away from the pathways that are undesirable. And at this time, the non-Arctic states are significant stakeholders in Arctic affairs, not only because of the realization of their legal rights and interests in Arctic, but also due to their contribution to the provision of the public goods. So non-Arctic states could contribute to the existing Arctic governance mosaic in various domains. So today I would like to answer the relevant questions from the perspective of the non-Arctic states and also the observer and Arctic Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So as I see, there's quite a few people online, so please don't be shy. And if you have any questions, please enter into the question and answer chat box. But to get us started, I'd maybe like to start with Paula and just talk about what kind of, given the huge increase in interest in all things Arctic marine, both in the Arctic Council and outside, what type of arrangements do you think would help answer that need that's coming?
Well, the Arctic Council is now increasingly focusing on Arctic Ocean, as I already said, that for this SAOs are dedicated the one-day meeting regularly for SAOs marine-based mechanism. And then there we have the Arctic Marine Strategic Plan. And then Arctic Council have prepared a number of assessments of pollution trends and on the status of biodiversity of the Arctic Ocean. It has assessments on pollution prevention. It has a number of projects that all the Arctic Council working groups are working on. And then we have PAME, Protection of Arctic Marine Environment Working Group, that has a specific mandate to enhance knowledge to action and to enhance policy measures related to conservation and sustainable use of Arctic marine and coastal environment. And then PAME has a number of projects for marine environment in the Arctic, like Arctic Shipping Traffic Data System, or Status and Trends of Shipping in the Arctic, Arctic Shipping Best Practice Information Forum, Underwater Noise, Invasive Species, and so on. So then this is the structures what the Arctic Council is working, but then we have, of course, the Arctic Science that is increasingly focusing on the Arctic Ocean, and of course, not only because of the global climate change studies, but also for research on biodiversity or marine industry and traffic, and so on. And the Arctic Ocean research is really heavily dependent on infrastructures, and all Arctic Ocean research is extraordinarily expensive. So cooperative bodies like IASC, International Arctic Science Committee, or Forum of Arctic Research Operators, Flora, offer really good platforms to exchange information and develop common projects.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
thanks, Paula. That's
Yeah.
a lot of information, and I see questions are starting to pop in now from the audience. But before we start those, maybe it might be nice to hear from Jonathan on what proposals for action that you said came from the Model Arctic or the Model Arctic Council that might lead to suggestions for improvement on how the Arctic Council and other Arctic states worked on Arctic marine issues. And then maybe we can start with the specific questions that are starting to come in.
Yeah, sorry to jump in just 1 second. For the panelists, when you're not speaking, if you could please remember to mute yourselves, it just helps with the audio for the person who is speaking. Thanks so much. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Thank you. I'll just, there are 19 concrete proposals, so I'll speak to just a couple that I thoroughly enjoyed and thought were very interesting. First was we wanted to do, I guess I will say for Paula, we did extend the funding for each of PAME's current programs, so she can at least be happy that there seems to be consensus amongst everyone that PAME is doing an excellent job in which we have extended our funding. But two for me that I thought really stood out were we wanted to do an Arctic specific sensitivity assessment in which we sort of identified areas of high biodiversity, both on land and sea, particularly the sea, given that there hasn't been as much exploration in that area, in which we, in phase 1, would explore the ability to create more MPAs, and in phase 2, to actually try to designate those or to get those protected under the sort of the IUCN categorizations. And I thought that was, that took a lot of negotiation and a lot of discussion and unification of variety proposals, and I thought that was a particularly good example of of online diplomacy. Another one that I thought was rather interesting was the sorry, as I look through it, is sort of what we've called the port feasibility study. And that was sort of the encouragement, I think, of what Norway is already doing domestically, which is the use of multi-purpose ships, and that, we would use free prior informed consent of the indigenous peoples to look at the development of any future port, so that it is done sustainability, while at the same time trying to address the marine litter caused not only by shipping, particularly with concern of flags and convenience, but within the cruise ship tourism industry, just to highlight two that I thought were very, I thought, wide-reaching and actually feasible for the Arctic Council. But, we address things such as sustainability within the Northern Sea Route, trying to demilitarize, or at least attempting to demilitarize somewhat of the Northern Sea Route while still developing its port infrastructure in a sustainable manner with consultation of indigenous peoples. And really the principle of free, prior, and informed consent was something that was strong and I think brought throughout each of our proposals, and was something that we really focused on. And I think something that perhaps isn't done within the Arctic Council that we really found was more encouragement between the various working groups. Obviously, PAME and CAF have a very close relationship, and we wanted to sort of at least do a harmonization for species, both marine and terrestrial, in terms of endangered or keystone species, a harmonization of sort of our domestic efforts of the member states to protect those species. But we also had, within that NSR proposal, a cooperation between PAME and the EPPR. And we also encouraged the Sustainable Development Working Group and PAME collaboration when it came to sustainable development, as well as research into sacred sites and ancestral lands of indigenous people. So we really tried to encourage more collaboration between the working groups. And if anyone has any specific questions regarding the types of proposals, please let me know, and I'm more than happy to answer them. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan. You mentioned a couple of key phrases there, such as sensitivity assessments, exploration, and a focus on shipping as well. And one of the questions we've just received is for Jiayu, and it's focused on how is artificial intelligence on board commercial vessels being incorporated into the process of decision-making when it comes to Arctic shipping and routes in the Arctic? And maybe you'd like to say a few words on that.
Yeah, well, yeah, well, actually, I have just read the questions on the question and answer box. Well, it's fine. Well, I would like to talk about how about the policy and decision responding. I mean, about the research. Is that the question? Excuse me.
Yeah, the question was how is artificial intelligence being integrated into commercial vessels, and how that might be applied in Arctic shipping decision making?
Yeah, I see. Okay. Well, actually, well, there are several very influential commercial enterprises in China. Well, as far as I know, well, for example, some research institutions and universities will get the relevant data and have the interview with the the practitioners in the commercial shipping companies. In other words, to hear the voice from the industry. And then we'll see whether it is necessary and what is the best way to have the artificial, as mentioned in the question, to have the integration of the artificial intelligence on the commercial vessels, whether it is feasible and how it could be practiced. And then there will be research results from the research institutions or the universities to the governments. And then governments will collect all the data and advice from those research institutions to talk about the relevant standards and the measures, then the decisions. And then also, have a look whether they could meet with the general requirements from the international rules and the MO. So after all these rules, finally, there will be a final decision about the artificial intelligence that could be used on the commercial vessels.
Okay.
For the shipping.
Okay, thank you for that. And we also have a general question to all three panelists, which touches a little bit more perhaps on what Jonathan and Paula were discussing. And that's what initiatives you think might be most valuable on which has been impossible to reach consensus in PAME or other fora. So what initiatives are valuable, but where no agreement has yet been reached, either in PAME or elsewhere, that might be of use for Arctic issues. Examples might be, for example, a treaty in the Arctic marine areas, things like that.
May I
Please, Paula. Yeah.
start? Yes. Yeah, and I realized I missed one of the questions a bit. What is the speciality of ecosystem-based management? And I think at the same time, it's a little bit an answer to this question and what PAME could do more and what is it actually approaching to right now. And then a little bit more about ecosystem-based management. It is holistic and integrated, and it indeed integrates physical, biological, and ecological sciences. But at the same time, it integrates different fields of governances, and it focuses on the whole ecosystem. So it's horizontal cooperation involving many sectors of governance. And of course, then it approach requires support from several fields of sciences, and it also operates in different levels from local, regional, national, and global. And the basic principle of the management follows pretty much a common sense. The idea is simple, even if it's a bit complicated to describe. First, you identify the ecosystem, like Barents Sea. Then you set ecological objectives for its good condition. You assess its status, after which you make a plan of action how to reach the good status and manage human activities according to it. And then you start to monitor if the actions worked. And if not, you make updated action plan and monitor again. So ecosystem-based management is kind of never-ending loop, assessing, actions, monitoring, assessing, actions, monitoring. And it's, as I said, really a mechanism where science managers and policymakers systematically and concretely cooperate. And this is something what Arctic Council and with the support of PAME, I think is going towards step by step. Arctic Council is already doing assessments, but kind of this loop is a little bit lacking, and also the whole process of monitoring is still requires a lot of advancement. And there is a project of SAION, Sustained Arctic Observing Network. This is something that Arctic Council should really pay attention to, because it is the basis of ecosystem-based management and this kind of approach. Thank you.
As Jonathan or Jiayu, anything you'd like to comment on Paula's description of how ecosystem-based management is being applied and an approach that PAME is taking within the council?
Well, sure. If I could address, I believe, the original question, something that, at least for us, that I wish that we could have done a little bit more of was, again, the reticence towards legally binding. I know that in recent years, there has been a trend towards at least some legally binding instruments stemming from the Arctic Circle as a forum. But one thing that I thought within the panel itself was not only was there a reticence for that, and we did include free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples, really defining and getting Indigenous peoples involved was, I think, something that was difficult for us to reach consensus on. Yes, we used the prior and informed consent language, but when you really hammer down into what does that mean, is that really decision making by Indigenous peoples? And it doesn't seem that there really is any, you can inform the Indigenous indigenous peoples and those that are affected within the Arctic, but yet they really have no veto power, say, as they do within the Arctic Council itself via the permanent participants, or really have any decision making at the local level. So I wish we kind of struggle to find stronger language, and I wish that we would move towards that. And within the ecosystem approach, I think we kind of defined it more as we were focusing on marine litter and especially plastics, we really tried to focus on a circular or connective economy in terms of rather basing it through the environment, focusing on it through the economy and how we can sort of use our own domestic policies to prevent the plastics getting out into the ecosystem anyway. So addressing it sort of at the domestic level through the more through the industry perspective rather than the ecosystem perspective. And I unfortunately think that, as Paula mentioned, we really did not think regarding the ecosystem approach as much as perhaps we should have, at least within the Model Arctic Council. And I think that those are excellent points that she makes going on towards in the future. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. One of the challenges, of course, working in the Arctic and in the Arctic Council in particular is how do you effectively engage industry so that you can sort of mainstream biodiversity and take environmental issues into account in development activities there. And with that in mind, one of the questions that's come in on the question and answer box is that the person asking the question would like to hear the panelists' thoughts on recent draft legislation passed by the IMO, the International Marine Organization, on the ban to use heavy oil in the heavy fuel oil in the Arctic by 2024. And the direction of the question is that enough to protect the marine ecosystem in the Arctic, and is the deadline soon enough? So would any of the three panelists like to respond on that particular question?
I can give my personal thought, but I'll if obviously I'm not an expert as much as Paula or Jiayu, so I will defer to them if that's okay. But I guess for my own personal opinion is, one of our proposals was to continue to follow the IMO guidelines, even though we had the ability to go beyond those IMO guidelines within the Arctic Council. Personally, I think it's tough because how we define the Arctic is so different, even within the various working groups of the Arctic Council and other various international bodies. I mean, is it 66 degrees north? I mean, obviously CAF and PAME have different working definitions of the Arctic. For me, I think that the regulation passed by the IMO is really key on how they define the Arctic. I mean, technically only Iceland has the island of Grimsey in the Arctic. And I think if those guidelines do not address Iceland, Iceland could become a very large player in terms of, ships stopping off to change from heavy fuel oil to other types of more sustainable fuel use. So I don't, in terms of how you define the Arctic, I think is key. 2024 is hard to say, I think, with the rate of climate change and whatnot that we're going. I don't know if any action at this point is soon enough. I think, action should have been taken previously. So I don't think the deadline was soon enough, but in terms of preserving the marine ecosystem itself, I do think that that the IMO is doing the best it can under the circumstances that it's been given. And so I really think it really just will depend on how we define the Arctic in the final guidelines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. And building on that particular issue, there is another question as well, where someone asked, is the use of nuclear energy on board civilian vessels seen as an alternative to heavy fuel oil in Arctic shipping? Would Jiayu, please? Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, I would like to say some words about the previous question about IMO's ban on the heavy fuel oil in the Arctic by 2024. But as far as I know, that the PAME and STGW and the working group under the Arctic Council has worked several years for the study about the ban on the heavy fuel oil, and well, there are several suggestions, and also, well, the Arctic Council actually has already submitted the relevant report to the MO, well, which might be representative of the consensus of the Arctic states. Actually, it seems that the ban on heavy fuel oil is how to say, it is well, it's very necessary, no matter on the middle term or long term perspective. Well, but the only problem is that for how long time we should have such kind of ban, whether the states could come to the conclusion under the MO to have such kind of ban since 2024. So probably I thought whether that MO may consider several steps, measures like the climate change strategy, like the 3-step climate change strategy, to finally realize the heavy fuel oil ban in the Arctic. That is some comments, well, of the previous question. Well, for the question for me, okay, let me see.
On whether you think nuclear energy
okay,
is an alternative to heavy fuel oil use in Arctic shipping.
Yeah, okay. Well, here, actually, the ban on the heavy fuel oil is will have some impacts on the usage of the Arctic passages for the user states. Well, of course, including, for example, China, Korea, and Japan. And actually, as far as I know, that the Chinese government has paid a lot of attention on the sustainable usage of the Arctic passages. So here, the usage of the clean energy is very important for the long term. And actually, I think the scientific research vessel has already tried to use the clean energy, but I'm not sure whether it is the nuclear energy or not. I think it is the natural liquid gas, but not the nuclear energy. So I think that China as a member state under the Council of the MO, that China will finally accept the final decision from the International Maritime Organization, and also as an observer state, that China will of course respect the relevant decisions by the Arctic states. So the welfare, the well-being of the Arctic citizens will be the first significance for the, for the user states, of course, also including for the commercial vessels from the user states. So I think here it is very important to take care and not to have any, non-environmental friendly energy released at this very fragile environment. So I think probably, more consideration will be made here.
Okay, thank you, Jiayu. And building upon your question as well, you touch a little bit upon the issue of the role of Arctic observer states in the Arctic Council in marine decision making. And this is just an open question to all 3 panelist members. How do you see non-Arctic states and their engagement in decision-making processes in marine issues in the Arctic? Silence is also very good.
Well,
Hi, Paula.
Well, in general, I see the role of observers in the Arctic Council very important. All the Arctic issues are global, so there is no way to deal way to deal Arctic issues without a common dialogue with all stakeholders, so including Arctic states and observer states, and that includes also marine issues. I think that is the attitude in the Arctic Council, and then the Arctic Council working groups have organized common dialogue events with observers to discuss on marine issues especially.
Jonathan, were there any outcomes from the Model Arctic Council that touch upon this issue that you'd like to bring up? Perhaps some of the suggestions of the 19 recommendations that you came with?
Sure. So, one was, again, encouraging domestic legislation regarding the circular economy. And that was very important for us to sort of stop plastics at their source. And that was one of the larger proposals that we had was coordinating with the UN and aligning not only our domestic legislation with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but also attempting to do what the UN and some of the, I guess, Fennoscandia states have been working with in Southeast Asia in regarding to preventing plastic pollution in that realm and bringing that to the Arctic to try to do some of the initiatives that have been done within Southeast Asia through the UN, but to bring it through the auspices of the member states and the permanent participants and to include indigenous knowledge. So those were sort of two ideas in which we attempted to bring a global focus into the Arctic. And I do think that the observers with their various specialties and their own views are important to have. And unfortunately, we had a limited number of observers at our current Model Arctic Council, but it definitely was the concern of many of those involved that marine pollution, especially within microplastics and plastics, is a global issue. And we attempted to do as much as we could within the Arctic region to incorporate those international bodies to prevent plastics at their source. We were probably a bit restricted in our language and couldn't go too far beyond our mandate, but it was definitely a concern. And I think if we were to have many observers and perhaps have informal discussions in between sessions, those types of studies or those types of action plans really could have been put forward, and I think would be put forward if those representatives were included in our Model Arctic Council.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Of course, the engagement of non-Arctic states is one of the big challenges for the Arctic Council, is how they manage to do that on a way that everyone is happy with. And Jiayu, have you any thoughts upon, for example, China, as it describes itself as a near-Arctic state, about how it engages in the Arctic decision-making process?
Yeah, me? Okay.
Please, yeah.
Is it my turn? Okay.
Yes, it is indeed.
Okay, well, China was granted the observer status in 2013, together with Japan and Korea. And actually, I'm very happy to hear from the officers from Arctic Council about the comments of the importance of the observer states under the Arctic Council. And I think actually it is very important, I mean, for the Arctic Council's observer states involved in some more, more and more study about the sustainable development and the marine environment protection topics under the Arctic Council, because well, along with the openness of the Arctic passages and the sea ice melting, the passages or transit through the Arctic passages and the exploration activities in the Arctic may cause the may cause various results. So the involvement from the observer states and from the non-Arctic states is quite important. I mean, because there might be some thoughts about how could be better explore and use the Arctic. And after such kind of involvement, the user states and also the observer states could better implement the relevant policies, I mean, that might be concluded by the Arctic Council and by some other organizations under the UN. So that's my thinking. Thank you.
And it's good to note as well that increasingly policy recommendations coming from the Arctic Council are touching on issues that extend far beyond the Arctic. When you think of in terms of ecosystems, migratory species are a very important one. And for the first time now, through the Arctic Migratory Birds Initiative, you have the Arctic Council recommending are mandating actions that should happen in, for example, Asia, in South America, and places like this. And when these sort of things happen, it calls then for some more parity of engagement on how these states cooperate on ensuring these things actually happen. One issue that several people have touched upon has dealt with Indigenous people, Indigenous knowledge, and how they might actually be more effectively improved or engaged within the different decision-making processes in the Arctic. And one of the questions that's come through on the list here is that could provisions within the UN and its Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples be applied to enhance their engagement in Arctic marine decision-making? So I'd like to open that issue up to the three panelists if they have any thoughts on how Indigenous people, Indigenous knowledge could be more effectively engaged or it's co-produced with science knowledge when it comes to decision-making in the Arctic. So would anyone like to jump and get that one?
Well, yeah.
Paula, please. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, as a whole, the Arctic Council has traditionally considered as a unique international body because it has such a good arrangement with Indigenous people's participation in general. So the basis there is there at least, but of course there is a lot to do to improve and concretize how the knowledge should be and can be and will be involved in different actions. One method is my message, this ecosystem-based management. It will offer a systematic tool for that. The Arctic Council is having several projects to seek better involvement of Indigenous peoples. There is a project by PAME called Meaningful Engagement of Indigenous peoples in marine projects. And then there is a quite recent project that has just been completed. It's environmental impact assessment in the Arctic, and it discusses also how local and Indigenous peoples' participation in different investment projects should be improved in the Arctic. So there is at least a lot of work going on for that, and step by step going better, hopefully. But as we heard in earlier panel, there is a lot to do still. Thank you.
Thank you. There are lots of challenges when it comes to resources and capacity in terms of finding ways to more effectively engage Indigenous knowledge and co-produce knowledge in the Arctic. Jonathan and Jiayu, have you any thoughts on this issue?
I'll just express quickly my personal view. I mean, I do think that adopting both, UNDRIP and the IAO169 as done by the UN as well would greatly enhance the rights of Indigenous peoples within not only the Arctic, but within the subarctic and, the continental United States and wherever they may be, or Indigenous peoples may be. But I know that, again, it's quite difficult given the various co-management schemes that each nation has chosen to, address the various Indigenous peoples within their borders. But I do think that, again, at least through the Arctic Council, even, we know that the 6 permanent participants do have an effective veto. However, as Paula mentioned, that the funding and resources is quite problematic. And I do wish that there were perhaps more funding, or at least proposals for more funding through various ways in which we can try to include Indigenous peoples, at least within the working group level, because even though that's where a lot of Indigenous peoples do participate and can provide their own knowledge, there are so many that that just the costs and ability to travel, it's quite difficult to attend them all, to continue to always have a voice present for them. And I think I don't really know of a measure, and Paula can correct me if I'm wrong, if there is a way to really have a joint fund to encourage the participation of Indigenous peoples at every working group event where the sort of the nitty-gritty details are formalized. Thank you.
Just to clarify one thing there, Jonathan, that the Indigenous peoples in the Arctic Council context don't have a veto. The Arctic states under its founding document are obliged to consult them on decisions they may take. So, but they do play a very influential role in the work that the Council does undertake. And one comment also just to note that with regards to having a common fund, that 5 of the 6 Indigenous organisations have established a fund called the ASSW Fund in 2000 and I think it was 17 or 18, with the intention of trying to find a way to galvanise funding to facilitate their engagement in Arctic issues within the Council and elsewhere. But it's always an uphill battle to find resources, as we all know, for things like this. Jiayu, have you any thoughts on this? Or?
Yeah, well, here actually I would like to add some how to say, some expression about Indigenous people from Arctic China's Arctic policy, that Chinese government actually considers Indigenous people's rights in the Arctic very important, and encouraged to respect Indigenous people's tradition, culture, and unique lifestyles and values. So here I thought the provisions of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples could play some positive role for the enhancement of Indigenous people's role in Arctic marine decision making. And also, I thought the study, the study, especially the knowledge, experience, tradition, and culture coming from Indigenous people, that could be highly considered when the regional or international rules that might influence Indigenous people's lifestyles, values, and interests are made. I mean, if such kind of, the UN declaration could be made, to include such kind of rights. That's it.
Okay, thank you. It's always a difficult topic and challenging to address. We have a question also in the chat box, which is asking about the possible increased potential for environmental disasters from fuel spills and contamination in the Arctic caused by opening up of marine routes. And the question, I think, is focused on how do you think that is that a case? And if so, how it should be responded to?
May I again?
Yep.
Go in the line. We go in same order all the time. But anyway, yeah. Then the question is, I can read it also. It's a little wider. That what will happen when sea ice melts and there will be more activities in the coastal areas in the Arctic. And if not talking about disasters or accidents, in general, I would say that there is another systematic approach, I think, that is stepping in the Arctic as well, is this process of marine spatial planning, which is a strategy how to use marine regions when human activities like traffic or blue growth or energy activities are increasing in the Arctic. It's often made by coastal regions or communes that normally are responsible also their planning on their land areas. And marine spatial planning is a process which is again done in cooperation with all relevant governance sectors if it's done well. And it includes cooperative activities, involvements and hearings of inhabitants, and also cooperation with private sector if it's done really well. And the marine spatial planning naturally is needed to be based on scientific information and knowledge such as underwater biodiversity and species and habitats and ecosystems in the area. So, well, this is at least one way to approach this increasing activity in the Arctic and how to manage it. systematically.
And I would know that there have been several different efforts as well to develop environmental impact assessment strategies and guidelines for how activities might happen in the Arctic. That's happened within the Arctic Council, but outside the Arctic, of course, you have the Central Arctic Oceans Fisheries Agreement, and you have a lot of work from ICES and PICES who are looking to find ways to assess what's happening in Arctic marine areas when it comes to specific industries. We also have a question here because we're coming towards the end of our session where we'll have a few minutes for each person to wrap up. But there's quite a complicated question about lateral carbon flow, which it seems quite complex. And I'm not sure if anyone here, you can see the question on the screen, if anyone is volunteering to offer to discuss, are there any activities with regards to lateral carbon flow that you're aware of or that might be underway? And I can take silence as an answer as well.
Tom, just so you know, there are a few questions that are just in the chat and not in the Q&A box.
Okay,
so I just want to
okay,
make sure you saw those.
Okay, I hadn't saw those. My apologies, I was just focusing on that. Thanks, Alan. But so we'll maybe leave lateral carbon flow and move on to some of the final questions. I'll just pick one or two because we only have about 8 minutes left. One question is focused on how do you move proposals so that they're approved by the Council of Ministers? And here I think someone is talking about the Nordic Council of Ministers perhaps, or to the Arctic Council. It's not clear. Once a project is over and its results are not approved and there's no further funding, do you continue developing the project? I'm not sure what that question is. I just read it out there myself. I think given the small amount of time we've left, is what we'll do is I'll ask each of the three panelists just to briefly summarize what they think the key challenges are facing Arctic marine decision making, just in a minute or two, and what you feel the key messages are popping up from our discussion here today. And Jiayu, if we can start with you, please. Hello?
Start with me?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll move from Paula this time and we'll go the other way.
Okay, I see. Well, here for the challenges of that might be encountered in building informed policies, I would like to mention from two levels. One is the international and the regional level. The other one is from the national level. Well, at the international and regional level, I thought the diversified primary interests of different states may cause the long-term negotiation before the rules, standards, and policies are generally agreed. But we could notice the successful progress made by the Arctic Council for the formation of the agreement on the enhancing international Arctic scientific cooperation in 2017, an agreement on the cooperation on the marine oil pollution preparedness and response in the Arctic in 2013, an agreement on cooperation in aeronautical and the marine research and the rescue in the Arctic in 2011. So we may come to we may realize that the pioneered study by the scientific research, non-government organizations, all these scientific research working groups are very important in such kind of scenarios. For example, the PAME and the Arctic Council released the Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment in 2009, may help the global scientists share the common findings and communicate with the respective government departments, and then indirectly help the official representatives reach a common agreement about the formation of polar code on the platform of MO thereafter. Well, and at the national level, I thought the communication between the decision makers and the scientists and the social scientists is quite important. So the regular communication mechanism is necessary to clear up the communication obstacles among them. And then the knowledge from scientists and the resolution methods could be easily and efficiently exchanged through this kind of mechanism to make the knowledge-based policy available. So that is my thought. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, please.
Sure. Just in reference to the one question that you were confused by, he was a participant in the Model Arctic Arctic Council. I think he means once the SAOs give it to the ministerial, how do you move forward with that? So Tom, you may actually be in a good position to answer that within the Arctic Council, since I believe you taught me the class on that. But in terms of the key challenges within the Arctic Council itself, I think, again, I think there always is a struggle of making sure that Indigenous voices are known. And, you know, as you said, there is no veto. I mean, in practice, yes, there is a veto, but again, no formalized veto over any policies. And that in some measures, the 8 member states have proceeded with something without the approval of the permanent participants. However, I think, you know, as we noted from the Finnish chairmanship, we kind of have this, I don't know if it's really a slow creep because it was quite abrupt, but just sort of this reinstitution of hard security and geopolitics back within the Arctic Council, which you know, I am no expert on, but you know, Tima Krova wrote a great article about this called, you know, is this the end of the Arctic Council as we know it? And I encourage anyone who has to go read that article. He has a lot of excellent thoughts on that. So I think, you know, the key challenge for at least a contemporary issue is defining the mandate of the Arctic Council. Do we let hard security come in, or do we, you know, keep it as a zone of peace, as it started out as the Gorbachev's Murmansk speech or Murmansk Declaration back in 1987? And I think, you know, how that future develops will be probably a key challenge going forward into the Icelandic chairmanship and into the Russian chairmanship in the next 4 or 5 years. So that is how I view is both the creep of geopolitics again, as well as strengthening Indigenous voices are the 2 largest challenges I would see going forward for the Arctic Council.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. And Paula?
Okay, thank you. So in the end, I would like to kind of highlight the issue of importance of environmental monitoring. It's hard as it's so expensive and it is so long-term commitment, but it is absolutely essential for any knowledge-based decision-making and implementation of science to action. And it is a problem in the Arctic, the monitoring. And then there is the need for commonly shared and open access to all monitoring and research data, which is again essential in the Arctic because the data is sparse. Here I want to raise again the important work of the Sustained Arctic Observation Network, the work of SEION that is run in cooperation by IASC, Arctic Council's AMAP and WMO. The SEION aims at integrated Arctic observing system, and it promotes open access to all Arctic observational data, and it wants to ensure sustainability of Arctic observing. So this is, I think, the very basis of all the knowledge-based decision making, monitoring. Thanks, and data.
So thanks very much, Paula. I think we've had quite a broad-ranging list of topics that we've touched on today. As Paula said, monitoring is the basis for all of the other work that we do. We monitor what's happening, we assess the changes, and then we try to apply them to all different sort of sectors, be it shipping, industry, fishing, and so on. So I'd like to thank all my colleagues on the panel today for a very interesting discussion, and thanks for your active participation. And thanks to everyone for all the questions, and my apologies to those questions we didn't get to answer, but there are quite a lot of them that have come in the different chat boxes. And please feel free, I'm sure, to follow up with either myself or any of my colleagues here if you would like to find information on any of your specific questions that we didn't touch on today. So I'd like to say thank you to everyone and good weekend.